This is TWIS. This Week in Science, episode number 737, recorded on Wednesday, September 4th, 2019. Ethics and the Brain. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Kiki, and today on This Week in Science, we are going to fill your heads with magma, lakes, and jellyfishing. But first,
TWIS is supported by listeners like you. We thank you for your support. We really couldn't do it without you.
Disclaimer. Throughout the history of humanity, humans have been attempting to answer one question with only modest result. What are we? And while the obvious answer these days is that we are upright bipedal, mostly hairless apes with greater than usual blood flow to a larger than obvious brain. The original questioning of what we are still lingers, though. And in our current age of medical technology, we have new ways of answering these questions. You can lose a limb and have a prosthetic replacement. A failed heart, liver, lung, or kidney, transplants are available. Lacking a gene here or there that's causing some ailment, a medication may supplement you. The human anatomy can largely be considered as parts, interchangeable, exchangeable, and more often replaceable. There is, however, one part we would hesitate to replace even if we needed to. Our brain. For a full brain replacement would essentially be an us replacement. So important as your brain is, we each week find something interesting for it to think about here on This Week in Science. Coming up next.
I've got the kind of mind that can't get enough. I want to learn everything. I want to fill it all up with new discoveries that happen every day of the week. There's only one place to go to find the knowledge I seek. I want to know what's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science. What's happening, what's happening, what's happening this week in science.
Good science to you, Kiki and Blair.
and a good science to you too, Justin, Blair, and everyone out there. Welcome to another episode of This Week in Science. We are back again to talk about the science as we do each week. There is so much. We have filled the show with some wonderful stories. I have brought some stories about hot magma, a Smarty Pants computer, and we have an interview into the world of neuroethics coming up in just a minute. Justin, what did you bring?
I brought an ancient lake and why ladies don't need to fire the gardener.
Okie dokie. Questions. I may have many. Blair, what is in the animal corner?
Just imagining that as a very old, weird Aesop's fable. Anyway, I have a story about how best to go jellyfishing. I have eavesdropping squirrels, and I have the world's fastest snail.
It's like that cartoon. There's an animated film about a fast snail. Anyway. Okay, fast snails. We're going to be one of them right now and zoom, zip, slide into our show. As we jump into it, I want to remind everyone that if you have not yet subscribed to This Week in Science, we are a podcast and found pretty much everywhere that podcasts are found. You can also find us on YouTube and Facebook by searching for This Week in Science, or just visit TWIS.org. But now I would love to introduce our guest for the evening. Tonight we are joined by Dr. Veljko Dubljevic. He is an assistant professor of philosophy and affiliate of the Science, Technology, and Society program at North Carolina State University. Veljko's research focuses on the ethics of neuroscience and technology and neuroscience of ethics. Little tit for tat there. He has recently published Neuroethics, Justice, and Autonomy: Public Reason in the Cognitive Enhancement Debate. This is the first book to address a political approach to neuroethics. Veljko, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us, jumping through a few hoops to get here tonight. We are glad that we get a chance to chat with you. Can we just get started by defining a few things? I don't know how many people have ever had a conversation about neuroethics. So can you tell us what that is?
Well, neuroethics is a relatively new field. There are some mentions of neuroethics in the latter decades of the 20th century, but most people agree that the modern day neuroethics started in 2002 with a conference or set of conferences, some in Europe, some in US, and some in Canada, where neuroethics was defined as this field joining neuroscience and ethics. So on the one hand, we have the ethics of neuroscience and technology, and these are the questions of what do we do with the tools of neuroscience when people find creative ways to use them. Let's put it that for now. I'll give examples later. The second, or the other sort of flip side field, is how can we increase our understanding of the foundational concepts in ethics? So how can we use neuroscientific methods and cognitive neuroscience in particular to understand how are we moral or how we do stuff, and how can we judge certain things and not judge other things, and so on and so forth. I'll give more examples later. I just don't want to overburden you at this moment.
It's not a burden at all. It's just piquing our interest, right? It's kind of like that teaser before the news story begins. How did you get interested in this area of research and also just thinking about who we are?
Well, first and foremost, I'm a philosopher, but there's like different philosophers, and some philosophers are very interested in everything that's going on that tells us about ourselves. And if you're very serious about doing ethics, you have to be kind of on par with the empirical results. And there was some extremely interesting results coming from neuroscience. People were put into fMRI machines to be scanned while making moral judgment and decision-making tasks, and that was fascinating. So that was publicly fascinating, but more interesting actually were the results of the neuroscientific experiments using EEG, because they could pinpoint the timing of decisions as opposed to where in the brain they're happening, and so on and so forth. So that kind of became very fascinating for me, especially since we could. So it's kind of this double thing or a circular thing in terms of neuroscience is impacting ethics, but it's also that we need ethics to understand what to do with neuroscience and neurotechnologies. So we had all of these tools, such as transcranial direct current stimulation and transcranial magnetic stimulation, with which we can do a lot of, weird stuff. So some early experiments with TMS were geared towards opening your savant abilities. So how can you be savant like the character in the Rain Man, and kind of unpack these capabilities you might have. So some forms of research were interested not in terms of how can we have more therapeutic effects or how can we investigate the brain, but how can we change ourselves to become something else. And that brings a lot of different ethical questions. First ethical question is, how does this pass an IRB, right? Second, who's going to fund this?
And by IRB, for people who don't know, that's the Institutional Review Board that tells you whether or not your experiment is basically ethical. Yeah.
Yep. Who is going to be funding this? Does this get funded by taxpayers' money, or should we allow private companies to fund that sort of thing? And so on and so forth. Once it works, do we allow that to be, offered online to everyone? Or do we have, clinics offering that? And a range of questions kind of opens up. And hence the fascination with these kinds of questions and the need to write a book.
So immediately, not knowing enough about this, my first question is, those are interesting implications, the questions to be answered. But the first question is, can we do it?
Well, we can do a lot of things. So if you're asking, can we do it with TMS and unlock certain savant abilities? Well, there are experiments that show that it can be done with some individuals. So In principle, yes, we can do it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because if it was just science fiction, then I would have written a science fiction book, not a book about science and technology.
Have you tried it? Anything? Have you tried TMS or DCS yourself?
Well, yes. So here's the thing. You asked me how I got into that. After my first doctorate, I wanted to know more. So I was trying to find ways to get more training in that. And I managed by getting funding for a second doctorate. So as part of that, I was in Tübingen, Germany, where there's a lot of brain research going on. So there's the Hertie Institute for Brain Research. There is the Max Planck Institute for Biological Cybernetics, and so on, for not to bore you with the names of dead Germans. So I had the wonderful opportunity to work with people there and have hands-on experience with transcranial magnetic stimulation. So all the funny stuff, from taking off all of your keys and every metal object, because it is a very powerful magnet, to having a sensation of someone striking you with a hammer. I mean, it's not that hard, but it is a weird sensation, someone stimulating your brain using magnetic waves.
Yeah, I've heard there is an entire community of people. So there's the research community that are using these stronger magnets to induce that magnetic field, inducing electrical current in very specific locations in the brain to, have you, to turn off certain feelings. Or in some research, I've heard of people saying, when it's focused on a particular area, saying, "Oh, I had a feeling of peace and like oneness with the world," or they feel more focused, or depending on where the magnet is stimulating, there are different cognitive perceptions of how a person feels. There's also the transcranial direct current stimulation, which I've heard is not quite as it's not quite as much of a and something you feel. Like there's a little bit of electrical stimulation on your scalp, but I've heard people use little muscle stimulators they can buy off the rack at a store, and are experimenting basically at home. There's like
Correct.
A Reddit community.
Not just that, there's like tons of people on YouTube posting videos like about them zapping their brains and utilizing devices that were not approved for that, but basically produce the same effect, where you place your electrode is your thing, or so they claim. So there's a slight difference between TMS and TDCS. Mm-hmm. So TMS is generating electrical current directly within the neural structures, because the magnetic waves pass the skull, and it's actually inducing electricity within your brain, which makes it more powerful in some ways, and it's more focused. TDCS is actually using weak direct current, so one you can find in a 9-volt battery, to pass current through your skin and through your skull, through your brain, and then to another electrode on the other end, which has interesting implications because it's doing two things. Because there is the anode and the cathode. One is excitatory and the other is inhibitory. So at the same time, you are exciting a part of your brain and inhibiting another part of your brain, which most of people on the Reddit community actually don't know about. They only read about the neuroscientific experiments in which neuroscientists carefully measure the effects of the excitation, not the inhibition. They place the electrode that it inhibits in some other inconspicuous area of the brain, or the head, I should say. And then they do not measure what is the sort of cognitive capacity that is affected by that. So in my research, my colleagues and I have been looking at how these findings have been reported in the academic literature and also in the print media, and how the public learns about that. And of course, the information is skewed from the need to publish striking results and the hype that comes from the science itself, via the fact that people are not actually measuring the inhibitory effects because they are interested only in the excitatory effects, to the fact that the print media sensationalizes everything, and they speak of it as like a thinking cap and so on and so forth. And this has produced not only the Reddit community, but also the commercial producers of TDCS machines. So not only are those that are sort of muscle stimulants, they're machines used specifically for neurogaming or other purposes. I found their disclaimers that, there's like a frequently asked questions part. One of the frequently asked questions is this FDA regulated? And the answer is no. FDA has no jurisdiction because it is not a medical device, which is technically true, which leads us to the question of, should FDA have jurisdiction? How do we regulate these technologies? If we are allowing, or if we have muscle stimulators that are being used to zap your brains, and also to people popularizing that on the media, maybe we should have a conversation about, our policies and regulations, and if they're causing more, if they're, preventing the public from misinformation and so on and so forth.
But then there's the other side of it, which is, you've got a 9-volt battery and a couple of wires, somebody could just create these devices themselves, not necessarily buy them from a company. And, what is if you are suffering from depression or you want to enhance your ability to focus, you can go get an antidepressant or you can drink a cup of coffee. There are ways that are accepted by society. I mean, coffee's not regulated by the FDA, yet we use it to enhance performance, to wake ourselves up. What are the ethics around the personal use and that freedom aspect?
Well, there is a debate about that. So specifically about the use of different stimulants, legal and otherwise. So there's like this movement about biohacking in terms of like we want to overcloak the brain. A lot of people come from the IT sector and they're used to overcloaking computers, and they're like, let's increase the computational power of our mind, which is all well and nice if they know what they're doing. Right. So a lot of people that are on that Reddit community for TDCS are actually computer engineers that are mixing and matching stuff. And actually you can make a TDCS machine from scratch with readily available materials. So it is complex. That's, as I said, that's why I wrote a whole book, because and just on the example of TDCS, it needs to be kind of assessed ethically and in terms of policy in 3 forms: as a product, because people are creating and selling that on the market; right. As a service, because there are clinics offering that, saying, look, we have trained professionals and you can come in and we know where to place the electrodes and then you'll get the effect you desire. So product, service, and then do-it-yourself jury-rigged gadget, which may or may not be potentially dangerous. But coming back to the issue of personal freedom, there is a lot of debate about whether, let's say, taking a tablet of Adderall, which is a mixed amphetamine salt, is comparable to drinking coffee or comparable to, using cocaine, right? One is a legal stimulant and another is a very illegal stimulant. And the debate hinges upon the effects these drugs have. And unsurprisingly, this debate it's not resolved yet. There is stringent sort of positions for allowing more personal freedom in terms of you want to have your Adderall pill with your coffee, it's your thing. And others who are saying, look, there are good reasons that we are banning cocaine. And there are good reasons why Adderall or amphetamine actually is regulated and sometimes even banned. I'll just give you one fun example.
Yeah.
Japan had an amphetamine epidemic after the Second World War because they had a lot of people have had to take amphetamines as part of the war effort in order to work longer, in order to concentrate, in order to focus, and so on and so forth. Japanese are into virtues and, being diligent and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, there's this drug that lets you do that. And lo and behold, after the war, millions of people were hooked on that drug. So they were addicted. Mm-hmm. And to this day, it is very stringently regulated in Japan. Even if someone has a prescription for Adderall, they should check carefully if they can bring it in Japan or not, because they're not kidding with that stuff.
That's fascinating. I mean, it seems like it's passed out to everybody here in the United States. It's a very common compound.
It is, and there are differences. So I mentioned I was in Germany, and after that I was in Canada, and now I'm doing research and teaching here in the United States. And everywhere when I'm doing or teaching about this, about the topic of cognitive enhancement, I ask my students, how many of you know someone who has been using this without a prescription? If you're asking students to talk about something that is technically illegal behavior, then you're not going to ask them to incriminate themselves. You're asking them if they know someone.
Yeah,
so
right.
in Germany...
That's me. I know me. Yeah.
In Germany, 5 to 10% would raise their hand. In Canada, 20%, and in the United States, 50%. Uh-huh. So there are differences in how widespread certain practices are, but again, these are linked with how stuff is regulated. So in Germany, getting your hands on Adderall is way harder than in the United States. So even if someone has a legitimate diagnosis of ADHD, they will get Ritalin, which is a type of methylphenidate. So it's just a brand name, but it's a way less dangerous compound than amphetamine. And here in the United States, it's kind of, 90% of the market currently is taken by Adderall. Whereas Ritalin used to be a thing in the 90s, but now it's kind of only 10%. There are other drugs. It's not out of favor. So amphetamines are way more potent than methylphenidate. Methylphenidate just blocks the dopamine reuptake, whereas amphetamines are actually reversing the dopamine transporter action. So it's in terms of your bang for buck, if I can use that term, one tablet of Ritalin is less than one tablet of amphetamine, which has its own effects in terms of addictive properties. I have this strong feeling that a lot of people who, if I ask them if they know someone and so on and so forth, are actually hooked and can no longer function without having access to stimulants. Now, one can say, well, yeah, and you're hooked to coffee, which I am. I cannot function if I don't have my coffee in the morning. Uh-huh. But arguably, the getting overboard with coffee means that I just don't sleep one night, and maybe I'm kind of upset about that and so on and so forth. Whereas with amphetamine, if one gets overboard, there have been cases of psychosis, which is way more serious than anything that can be thrown by other compounds that are used as stimulants.
So then do you start looking at these compounds, these technologies that are being used for neuroenhancement, to enhance cognitive abilities? Do you start looking at them then at the level of what harm they do to the individual, and also from that, what harm they do to society? Is that where the ethical stance comes in?
So the ethics debate about neuroenhancement used to be in general terms. Some people were believing that enhancement is per se problematic. Well, most of those positions, and here we come to why the political perspective, were sort of informed by certain ideologies. If people say, this is unnatural, therefore we don't want to use it. it's their belief. It's perfectly legitimate. But if you say something is unnatural, do you have the right to ban practices and put people in jail for doing it?
If you are like the dictator, you can, but
Well,
not in a democracy, right?
Yeah, should you,
the-
I guess, is the question, right?
So the book is about how this works in a democracy. There's the flip side as well. So those people who are into biohacking, they're into transhumanism, posthumanism, and so on and so forth. So they have this vision of, transcending the limits of humanity and so on and so forth. Well, do we want these visions of humanity to guide every decision in society, including this one? I doubt that, right? So the question of regulation comes into play in terms of, okay, let's set aside ideological debates in terms of whether you think this is going to destroy humanity. This is what I call gloom and doom views, right?
Right.
Or do you think this is the best thing since we invented the wheel or fire or whatever? These are the hype and hope views, right? And let's look at those things we can, agree on in terms of scientific criteria. So let's quantify the harm at the individual level. Let's quantify addictive properties and so on and so forth. That's why I was using, and some of my work is in transforming these sort of expertise judgments or evaluations from psychiatrists and toxicologists and so on and so forth into numerical values that we can work with to kind of compare, I'll say, apples and oranges. It's not apples and oranges, but it's methylphenidate and amphetamine and coffee and tobacco and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
What's fascinating to me too is, I kind of get the idea that there's people who think this is a good thing that they should be doing, people who are afraid of it and don't want people to be doing this. But I could also see this could be, if it works, if we get to a stage where, yes, people who are doing this sort of, undergoing this sort of self-treatment or narcotic or what have you, have a better ability to pay attention, are more present in the moment. There's some aspect of them to be able to multitask. I could almost see it becoming a job requirement. Right then, at some point in the future, where then it's, if you need either this level of education, this much experience, or have been on this narcotic for this duration of time for us to continue for the position. Because why not? You need to be able to lift 50 pounds for this job. You need to be not afraid of high places to be a roofer or something, right? So you could sort of see that people would have to not only choose an education, but they would
Choose
also
their
have
drug,
to
choose their poison.
They would have to choose a sort of mental stimulation that goes along with it that tailors their brain around certain types of tasks.
That is a hot issue, and its technical term for that is indirect coercion, in which an employer thinks that the short-term gains that the company or the organization is going to get outweigh the personal risks that an employee takes for that. And there the calculation is fairly straightforward. Some of these risks may materialize in 5 or 10 and so on and so forth years, where the employee may no longer be with the company, then they don't care about that. And therefore, and this is my position, I think it is unfair that companies profit from pushing people into using certain substances to be more productive and so on and so forth. Now, in terms of how you describe what it does, I have to kind of jump in and clarify certain things. So all of these, and it's not narcotics, it's stimulants. It's a different class of drugs. All of these drugs are actually providing performance maintenance. So the military uses them as well. So amphetamines have been used by the military in long-term missions so that the soldiers and mostly pilots actually could be longer in combat missions. They're actually moving from amphetamines to other classes of drugs, and I will not name any names in the public space because I don't want to promote anything.
Right. Yeah.
But they have known about these effects for a long time. That's why the Japanese were actually having that in the first place.
Yeah.
They have also known about the side effects and the potential for getting addicted and so on and so forth. So the military is very, very careful with how this is being used. Other organizations might have this impression that you could multitask or be more creative and so on and so forth, which is patently false. People will be more focused and be able to work longer, and they will have this impression that they're just amazing at what they do. But if you provide them with tasks and measure if they're better or not, usually they're either at the same level for a longer time, which still works, right? Mm-hmm. Or they're worse than they were.
But they're having a better time.
Yes. So I'll just give you another example. So truck drivers in Australia. Mm-hmm. The incidence of using amphetamines among truck drivers in Australia was fairly high. I would say comparable to the incidence of students in the United States using. And then the Australian government had the roadside controls for amphetamines and so on and so forth. And lo and behold, the incidence got way lower. They also had this, whistleblowing program, so that the employees could say, look, we're being pressured into using this, and so on and so forth. And that's, I would say, a good example of government stepping in to solve a problem. So regulation changes how stuff happens in society. And we should be open to learning from how things are done elsewhere. Maybe if we have a problem and elsewhere there's no such problem, well, maybe they're doing something right. We shouldn't be in blind jingoism. Everything that we do is perfect.
Right. I'm wondering, people in the chat room are bringing up the idea that there's a lot of science fiction that in the world, that authors, writers have already dealt with a lot of these kind of dystopian futures very often. But with, the idea of neuroenhancement of various kinds, what is it? Is it that our technology has finally gotten to the point where it really is having a public effect, that we are starting to have this conversation at a political scale, that your research is starting to actually, it will probably have influence on these political decisions that will come down the pike? And then do you think that we will be able to keep up with the pace of technological advancement now that it's really started?
Well, I'm kind of optimistic, not in the sense that my research will influence politics, because there's no guarantees of that, and politics are usually partisan. But to come to this issue, I'm optimistic in terms of keeping up. Most of these neuroenhancement technologies are fairly old, and we know about them, and we have been experimenting with them and know about the side effects and have a pretty good grasp in terms of the scientific or academic community, what it does and so on and so forth. There are differences in opinion in terms of whether something can be used responsibly. For instance, whether someone who is a trained physician and knows the risks should take a tablet of amphetamine just to go through, an operation and so on and so forth, something where they need that concentration and so on and so forth. And there are differences in opinion in terms of whether well-informed people should have the right to do something or not. Mm-hmm. My opinion is that government intervention needs to provide information, so not to allow the hype or the gloom and doom, so dystopian or utopian visions of the future, because we have both, right?
Right.
To kind of dictate the information that people have about using or not using a certain type of technology. Now, in terms of keeping up, a lot of those things that we get really excited about, and I don't want to sort of sound pessimistic in that way, but I'll give an example of ampakins. Ampakins was a class of drug that was promising to just blow our minds, and it worked wonders on rodents and rats, but it doesn't work on humans because our brains are way more complex than the brains of rodents. So once things are shown to work, we already have a community that is interested in the regulation and the ethical assessment and so on and so forth. And that's why I'm kind of optimistic about our chances of dealing with certain things. Now, of course, stimulants are not as much on the radar of the regulatory agencies as opioids are. Yeah. I mean, people are not dying. That is huge because people are dying, and everything else is in its shadow. But I think this is the kind of, I would say, at least with the student population, it is the epidemic in the shadow of the opioid epidemic. There are so many students that I presume are addicted. And I challenge them, if they're listening to this, just stop using for 3 weeks and see if you can do it. If you can, awesome. Then you're a responsible user. If you really need it and you get depressed and so on and so forth, if you're not using, well, then you need to seek help.
But I have finals coming up, or I have a big paper to write. Actually, you know what? I need to go home and visit my parents for the weekend. I can't quit then. There's no way. Yeah, I can see if you have an excuse for every social event or every task that you have in front of you as needing, then you're not it.
Yeah, and I'll just interject here with different kinds of regulatory approaches. So at the friendly neighborhood Duke University, which is 30 miles sort of west from where I'm currently at, they have in their student honor code that if you're using stimulants for neural enhancement, you're actually cheating. So students voted for that. So it's not illegal, right? But if you're on your exam and they know you have a stimulant, then you're actually technically cheating according to their honor code.
That's fascinating. And it's kind of, that's like the social code, it's if we voted on this and everyone decided together that this is not the way we want to play the game, then you're the odd man out. And so, yeah, that's fascinating.
There's a whole debate about, whole debate about whether it's cheating or not.
Yeah.
If you look at the sports literature, all of these substances are banned by World Anti-Doping Agency. And if athletes have them, they will be disqualified. Now, the question was whether students should be disqualified if they're on it or not. Of course, they're not. Most of the time, they're not. It is the Duke University Honor Code is this is the single occurrence to my knowledge. If there's more and someone knows about more, please let me know, because that's what interests me, right? But it is interesting because the more competitive the school, the more prevalent the use is. Yeah. Why? Well, indirect pressure, because you feel the need to, pull in those results, have better grades, and so on and so forth, and might have inflated expectations about what the drug will do for you.
Yeah, it's that competition. You need to perform, and because this is going to determine your future. It's going to determine whether you get into that grad school, whether you get into the postdoc. It's going to change everything, and I really need to get an A on the test.
But that's very specific. What about all the supposed brain health supplements that are out there? Or
right.
there's
the new one, NAD plus. That's the new one, NAD plus. It's
NAD plus. Right. St. John's wort helping my memory.
There's a bunch of these things out there that supposedly are the precursors to the things that your brain needs to function well. It's a slippery slope. You start deciding what's a banned thing for testing somebody's ability. I guess if they don't have a prescription for a drug that they're taking and it's not over the counter, that maybe you should be helping the students out by looking at that in the first place. trying to keep them healthy. But I don't know. I don't think I would necessarily agree that we live in an enhancement. You can change GABA levels by engaging in yoga. It's just no. You took a yoga class before you took the test. That doesn't count. Like you have to really start questioning then.
Well, on your way into the midterm, submit a urine sample.
That one seems rough. Yeah, that one seems rough.
So two things. Two things. I'm not really sure that the cheating in the honor code at Duke is really enforced by any drug tests. I think it's not. It's more of sending a message about this is who we want to be. And when we're talking about decision making and regulation, we need to kind of dissociate three kinds of levels. The first and the most important level is the public decision making. And you remember when I said about gloom and doom and hype and hope? Yeah. Public decision making should not be led by any of that. It should be led by facts and careful evaluation and assessment and so on. So if we know that something is harmful, we need to be very, very careful in terms of which substances we ban and which substances we regulate in terms of making sure that the information is provided and so on. There are differences in what you can sell over the counter, what you need a prescription for, and there are all kinds of ways in which society actually discourages you from using something, right? I'll just give you an example that is, I guess, familiar to everyone. In order to buy a packet of cigarettes, back in the 60s, you can watch commercials about how it kills the bacteria in your throat and so on and so forth. But nowadays, have you seen any commercials? No, not because it doesn't kill bacteria in the throat, but because it does so well that it kills you as well, right? So the society is discouraging the use of cigarettes by banning marketing. They still do it on Netflix. Right? Every actor is going to be smoking, right?
Oh, that is something I have noticed. You know what? You're the first person to point this out to me. But yeah, everybody on Netflix on every show is drinking and smoking. No, but they're not all period pieces. They're just like modern, which it caught me as odd. I'm like watching this modern day drama of some sort, and they're like chain smoking. I'm like, I didn't really think that happened they're like in a bar or something. Like, I didn't think you could do that anywhere. Looks perfectly normal on Netflix.
That's because they're not allowed to pay the usual marketing techniques. Now you'll see, commercials for all the drugs and whatever, because that's allowed, whereas commercials for tobacco products are not allowed. And that is form of discouraging use. Second thing, you have to provide all sorts of information. So in certain jurisdictions, you will see, plastered lung cancer pictures and so on and so forth. And then you have to pay additional taxes because the state is having this attitude. You want to kill yourself? It's your funeral, but we're not going to bill the cost. And all of these cancer patients and so on and so forth and cancer research, well, you're going to be funding it by paying extra taxes. These taxes can go up to 100%. Norway is my personal favorite. It's 200% tax on smoking. So if you want to smoke, pay the taxes, and we're going to discourage you from doing that, but you're still free to do it, right? So your argument for personal freedom is well noted, but there are more ways than just banning stuff. Now, coming back to supplements, in the United States, unfortunately, FDA has lost that battle, so supplements are not regulated. And sort of this public decision-making level is more or less a free-for-all. But there is non-public decision-making. There we have we can have the example of Duke University, right? Only those that are affiliated with Duke University have this set of values, and if you want to be part of them, then you should or should not be doing certain things. So hype and hope and gloom and doom views work for non-public organizations. If you're, Catholic or a member of a specific religious organization, you think that this or that technology is evil, well, feel free not to use it, right? But you cannot enforce that ideology on the rest of the society. And finally, finally, we have the level of individual decision making, where all of us are making decisions in terms of, I want to fund this, I want to buy this, and so on and so forth. So society is providing us incentives to do certain things, or not bothering to regulate anything, as in the case of coffee, or providing us with disincentives, right? So there are these different kinds of societal responses to these neuroenhancement technologies, and we actually use all of them. So certain things we encourage, certain things we let the market do what it is, certain things we discourage, certain things we ban, and certain things we even make mandatory. So some of the pro-enhancement authors are claiming that education is enhancement. Well, yeah, we made it mandatory, right?
So everybody gets the same enhancement. It's not some individuals getting it versus others.
I don't know if that's quite true, but
I'm not sure those that are homeschooled will get that enhancement.
Yeah.
But, hey.
The point you were making about the supplements and the FDA losing the battle on those, the NFL Players Union, our football players, have a lab that they have set up that they supplement, when they order, because they're looking for those supplement, the natural way to get around the things that are banned in the NFL. They send their supplements there to get tested, because a lot of players taking natural supplements have gotten busted because there's no regulation. So there's actual...
They're actual amphetamines in the
actual amphetamines or steroids or Prozac or whatever it is. There's actual drugs involved in these. And so they have this lab that is constantly catching basically, shoddy, either the thing that they say is in there, the ingredient actually isn't in there, or they've added something else to create a stimulatory effect that's not the thing. So yeah, that's a huge problem. So even when people are trying to, have that engage in that freedom of following some paper that they read or something they read on the internet, they still, in the end result, might not even be able to interact with it because there's no regulation on what's going into these pills. There's no monitoring.
Well, there's not enough regulation. There are certain things where we have had improvement. So remember Lumosity? Have you seen a commercial for Lumosity lately? They were everywhere, right? Yep. Up until the time that FTC slapped them with the fine because they were claiming that their brain gains are based on neuroscience, which is BS, if I can use that term, right? So a lot of neuroscientists and neuroethicists were concerned with these practices in terms of saying, oh, this is neuroscience and so on and so forth. And that's why I'm optimistic. Things move. I mean, it's not as good as we wanted it to be, right? There's no specific regulations, but there are, when someone really goes overboard, then the government reacts, or one or the other regulatory agency.
Yeah, and in many fields. And so supplements to the brain games, brain training. We've also got stem cells and, the future of genetic modification, wherever that's heading. There are all sorts of fun areas still to be regulated.
Well, CRISPRed humans are not really around the corner, but we'll see. We'll see.
So for a final kind of question to end this up, what do you hope by studying this, writing your book, and also talking about it? What do you hope can be gained by getting the subject discussed? And what can people get from it?
Well, I'm going to go back to what you said in the first place. What about individual freedom? Well, individual freedom means that there's no one breathing down your neck, and no one is misinforming you, and no one is selling you a pack of lies. So I'm hoping that by having a well-rounded discussion where people get to know what are the positive effects and what are the side effects and how likely it is and so on and so forth, they will not fall for, 60s commercials about tobacco killing bacteria in your throat, right? Yeah. And then selling you something that further down the line is going to kill you or cause something horrible that you never heard of in the first place. So more knowledge is good. More discussion is good, because then people can make informed, hopefully, individual decisions.
Absolutely. We didn't get to the neuroscience of ethics, the other part of your work, but that
well,
also...
I'm just gonna interject with a very, very short. That is the other part of my research.
Yeah.
Using the working on neurocomputational models of moral decision making, and I can send you a link to a recently published article. It's not in the book, because this is when I finished writing the book. This is what I did. So if you're interested in that, I'd be happy to send you that.
That would be great. I would love that. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah, and so you're at North Carolina, North Carolina State University, and
Correct.
we will have links to your website and to the book on our website. Is there anything else that you want to add before you go?
Thanks for having me, and I'm sorry I'm gonna miss the snail race.
You can listen or watch later. Yeah.
All right, I will.
Have a wonderful night. Thank you so much for staying up late to join us.
No worries. Thank you. Have a great one.
Thank you.
You too.
Ciao.
Everyone, ciao. Everyone, Dr. Veljko Dubljevic, and he is, his work on neuroethics is fascinating. And if you're interested, like I said, links will be on our website. We are going to take a break right now for those of you who are wanting to stick around for more science. You do that, because the science is coming around the break when it comes. That's right. This is This Week in Science. Stay tuned. Thank you for joining This Week in Science for another episode. We do appreciate that you have spent your time with us. And while you're still here, I just want to tell you a few ways that you can help TWIS keep doing what we do week after week after week, bringing you science, interviews, and news week after week after week. That's right. Head on over to TWIS.org. TWIS.org is our website where you can find all sorts of fun things related to This Week in Science. That's right. All the fun This Week in Science things. For instance, you can find a big orange subscribe button. That subscribe button can be used by your friends, by you, to subscribe to the podcast, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Makes it super easy. There's also a yellow donate button. The donate button goes to PayPal. And so if you're interested in helping us to purchase part of Blair's new computer, please consider donating over on PayPal. That will make it'll make it very easy for us to help fix up a computer for her sooner rather than later. Also, head over to the Zazzle store. Our Zazzle store is where you can find all the goodies that have TWIS logos, and it's the tote bags, the wonderful goodies with the TWIS logo, and also art from Blair's Animal Corner calendars from past years. Buy a gift for yourself. Buy a gift for a friend. Do you know someone who loves TWIS? Get them a present wrapped in TWIS paper. Oh my goodness. That could be pretty fun. And finally, if you click our Patreon link, it will take you to our Patreon community. The Patreon community is where you can also donate, not in a one-time manner like on PayPal, but in an ongoing fashion. So you click the orange button, because it's red button, become a patron. That is once a month at an amount of your choosing. If you donate more than $10 a month, $10 or more, then you will get your name read out at the end of the show. I will say thank you by name for helping us do TWIS on a weekly basis. $25 a month, and you get a t-shirt. We send you a little thank you. This is once a month, and we thank you so much for your support. We really could not do any of this without you. It's all you. Please help us continue to keep TWIS going. Help us to improve We appreciate your support. Thank you so much.
And we're back. You're listening to This Week in Science.
Yeah, we've come back. And I think I've got some science. Oh, but first, it's This Weekend. What has science done for me lately? What has it done for me? Oh, let me tell you. This week, our letter comes from Randy Lamonda. Randy writes and says, this is what science has done for me lately. NOAA weather.
Oh, yeah.
That's NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration.
Huge right now. Best ratings they ever got.
Randy says...
Nobody ever even heard of a Category 5 before. They got the scoop.
Weather alerts are so necessary. I have a generator, bottled water, and batteries. We have power trucks ready to spring into action. We have shelters to go to if the weather gets really bad. Our county is providing free sandbags. Can't imagine experiencing a hurricane with no science. Yeah, there's a lot of science that goes into experiencing a hurricane. Especially now that hurricanes are getting bigger, they have more there's a lot more water coming to shore. We can understand the physics of a hurricane and how it's really not useful to shoot a gun into it to slow it down. It doesn't work.
Or a nuke.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, science and weather, and for everyone who has. I don't know if people in the Bahamas listen to this show, but our thoughts are with all of you. The Bahamas have been devastated by Hurricane Dorian that just sat on the hurricane on the islands, and I was thinking it's like a Photoshop magic eraser. It was just trying to erase the Bahamas, and we don't want that. We don't want that at all. And so. This is a time to support people who will be definitely in need. So there are many, many charities that are helping out people who live in the Bahamas right now. And we've got the entire eastern coast that's still under siege, although not quite as bad.
Yeah. Sounds like so far so good. Not too bad at all. But
yeah. Oy, hurricanes. What? We've got I've got the earthquakes and volcanoes here. There's the hurricanes on the other side of the country. This is why I need my science to keep me sane and not worrying about the disasters. All right. If you would like to send in a What Has Science Done For Me Lately, send me an email, Kirsten@thisweekinscience.com, or send a message to our Facebook page. All right. Want to talk some science?
Let's
do
it.
Yay! Okay, first up, let's talk about magma. Magma. Yes. So this, I thought, was a very interesting study for multiple reasons. The high-intensity physics experiments that were done for the study are number one, and number two, let me get into this for you. So researchers are reporting in the August 30th issue of Science their work studying the ancient rock of Earth. What was our planet like after its formation? When did the rock that went into the mantle become more highly oxygenated? When did oxygen get concentrated into the rock? And now you might think, what? Oxygen in the rock? Huh? It goes in our atmosphere. We breathe it. Well, that didn't happen until like a couple billion years after the planet was formed. And the oxygen happened as in the atmosphere occurred as a result of the Great Oxidation Event. But prior to that, we got to know there's this whole cycle. The air and the water, it cycles down into the mantle cycles things back up, and it's this cycle. The air, none of it exists alone, which I find endlessly fascinating. And now, the Earth's breathable air we definitely have the mantle of the Earth to thank for it. And there's been this question of, okay, before the Great Oxidation Event, before all this stuff, the oxygen ended up in the air, what was it doing in the rock? How did it get concentrated there? And how did it then leak out into the atmosphere? And so these researchers have been looking at this chemical transition. And so they did this simulation of the ancient Earth. And they used this laboratory in Germany to simulate conditions about 600 kilometers deep inside a magma ocean. So they synthetically heated mantle material, basically this ferrous iron material, to thousands of degrees Celsius. And then they use anvils to crush the molten magma with pressures up to 20 gigapascals. This is just a lot of pressure and very high temperatures. And the fact that they did this in an experiment to me is just like, what? This is super exciting. So they found that when they did that and then measured what the mantle material looked like afterwards, they found that the ferrous iron had kind of split up and had become a majority oxygen-rich ferric iron. And the rest of the iron, so about 96% of it was this oxygen-rich iron, and the rest of it became a liquid metal iron. And so they think what happened is that at some point the Earth was bombarded and was just the mantle was just this molten magma ocean that at one point asteroids are hitting our planet and the whole surface of the planet was just melted. And because it was melted, all the pressure of all that hot magma pushing down on the rest of it caused this chemical transition to take place. High temperature, high pressure caused the transition from ferrous iron to this ferric iron and liquid metal iron. And so they think the liquid metal iron went to the center of the planet and created the core. And the ferrous iron was what was left in the mantle. And then that allowed the oxygenation event to happen. But anyway, studying the ancient Earth with crazy simulations of pressure and temperature, I think it's just fascinating.
It's really awesome.
Yeah, massive pressure, massive temperature. Who knows? And then, at some point, all that oxygen started leaking out a little bit, recycling from the mantle to the crust and out, and then boom, life. There we go. And now that life has evolved, you know what we have now?
What?
We have a Smarty Pants AI that's as smart as an 8th grade science student.
8th grade, huh?
Yes. 8th grade researchers at the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence developed an AI, an artificial intelligence called Aristo. And Aristo, over the past several years, they've been upgrading it with new programming, new little modules that allow it to do different things. And they keep giving it a science test. And this is a science test. This was a challenge that was put out by the Allen AI Science Challenge, in which the challenge gives $80,000 to the team that is able to get an AI to pass an 8th grade science test. Finally, years later, this AI Aristo has done it, scoring better than 90% on a multiple choice test geared for 8th graders. Although it wasn't like the same test that the 8th graders would be taking, it was modified slightly because the computer, this AI, can't see. Right. Doesn't have the program for visual processing yet. They had to get rid of all of the spatial questions that are picture-based.
Excuses.
Science. Yeah. And they had to get rid of any questions that would require an essay for an answer. because the computer, I guess, wasn't up to writing an essay. So
at an 8th grade level, I'm now not scared of AI anymore.
no, don't be afraid. Do not be afraid. But this finally, because of changes and advances in natural language learning, the AI is able to parse questions and the multiple choice answers that are available to be able to determine through cognitive reasoning which answer would be correct. And so an example, one question in the test asked, how are the particles in a block of iron affected when the block is melted? A, the particles gain mass. B, the particles contain less energy. C, the particles move more rapidly. D, the particles increase in volume. Can you answer this question?
I would say they move more rapidly.
Congratulations. Ding, ding, ding.
That's what temperature is.
Yeah, you're smart as an 8th grade science computer. So Aristo, in this particular case, retrieved the knowledge that particles move faster as the heat of a particle increase, and then also had to word associate melted with heat. So if the iron is, when that block of iron's melted, it had to associate that melting means there's heat applied, and also had to associate the term faster with more rapidly to be able to score C as the correct choice. Did you go through any of that reasoning in your considering the answer?
Not noticeably, but yeah, that would be it. I mean, it's a word association with a thesaurus. It's just having vocabulary, a range of vocabulary.
Yeah.
What
does it mean to melt? You're increasing temperature. Yes. What does an increase in temperature mean? It means they're speeding up. So.
Yeah. And so the AI has what are called agents, these problem-solving agents that help it to do its job. And there's one agent that looks up answers in a database. And I guess it's kind of like your brain looking up facts that you've learned. There's an agent that checks lists of associated concepts. And there's an agent that performs qualitative reasoning, which is part of this at all. So there's training, there's calibration, there's a lot that goes into simply being able to get 90% on this test. But it has improved substantially since its humble beginnings in 2014, when it only scored about 36% on a similar test. So it's taken 6 years, 5 years, 6 years to get to the point that it's able to actually pass a science test, but it's still not the same test that an 8th grader would take.
So if all of the questions are 4 multiple choice answers, chance would be a 25%, right?
Right.
Roughly.
That's random. Mm-hmm.
Right. So even at its earliest beginnings, it did better than chance.
Slightly,
which I think is still pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very interesting perception there. Yeah, I think you're right. It's so even at its earliest, it was doing better than chance.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about if you plopped a kindergartner in front of that test, they'd probably get a 25% if they weren't trying to make a picture with the Scantron,
Right.
So
smiley face or a rainbow.
It did better than that.
Yeah. So the idea, is this is artificial intelligence that could potentially, with this kind of skill, if it is able to, over the next few years, iterate and be able to add in things like the visual components, the essay question component, will it be able to, or it will also be able to improve things like Siri or, your Google Assistant, Cortana, all of these applications use AI to parse the language that we use to make requests. And
how long is it before this is incorporated into something like Google goggles and is being used to cheat in your?
Oh no!
Yeah,
well,
totally.
I was thinking more as angry as I get that my phone is listening to me. I still get really frustrated when I ask Siri a question that should be really easy to answer, and she just says, "Here are some links I found on the web." I'm like, no, you can answer this. You should be able to answer this.
You should don't just give me a web page. Yeah.
Yeah, and this could help with that, which would be pretty nice.
Yeah, I started throwing in extra verbiage. Like, how awful will the weather be today? How nice will the weather be today? And then the how awful one, I didn't get a response, but the how nice one, she said, she gave me the weather. And she said, I don't know if it's nice, but.
Was it really hot? Was it 100 degrees?
Yeah, it was a really hot day.
Yeah. Nice.
That's funny. That's funny. There's a question that Andy had asked one of the researchers after the article as an update to compare it against IBM's Watson. So if you remember the Jeopardy episode where Watson beat everybody, this is different. And Clark, one of the researchers from the Allen Institute of Artificial Intelligence, says that they both would likely struggle with each other's tests. They would fail each other's tests. Watson would likely struggle with science questions, and Aristo would struggle with the cryptic way that Jeopardy questions were phrased.
Mm-hmm.
And,
they were designed to tackle a specific problem.
Yes, exactly. And they were also designed differently. Watson didn't use deep learning. It was created before the deep learning technology, and Aristo uses deep learning. Watson had modules that tried different ways of looking for the answer and had many of them. And Aristo has few modules that try a variety of methods.
But Aristo would never pose the answer in the form of a question, and so we'd lose
every time. Exactly. Which I think this is also interesting. The design and of how these AIs are created is also very important for what they are capable of and what they will be able to do in the future as well. They will not be taking over our world yet. Not yet. They didn't really beat that 8th grade science test. It's all good. Justin, tell me a story.
Let's see. What have I got here? I have a deep drilling project that's been taking place. It kind of it's reminiscent of something that was done some years back that we reported on, where they found a lake that was largely undisturbed in Japan and drilled out the core to do some sort of further back analysis of climate and rainfall by sort of studying the undisturbed bottom of the lake. This is a different lake. This is Lake Ohrid, which is considered the oldest existing lake in Europe. It is situated between the borders of Albania and North Macedonia. It's north of Greece. It's just right north of Greece. I had to Google it. I didn't know where Albania and North Macedonia were. There's 47 researchers from 13 nations, but headed up by geologist Professor Dr. Bernd Wagner from the University of Cologne, who is now publishing its findings in Nature. What's pretty fascinating about this is they actually did the drilling back in 2013. They knew it was an old lake, but they weren't really sure how long it had persisted. They had a maximum drilling depth of 568 meters. That was enough to get them down to water depth, which is just 245. So what's amazing about this is after having 5 years to look at these sediment layers, they've discovered that, well, I'll quote Dr. Wagner here. We have shown that the lake formed exactly 1.36 million years ago and has existed continuously ever since. We were thrilled when we realized that we had retrieved one of the longest and most complete lake sediment cores from the oldest lake in Europe, getting the chance to obtain high-resolution regional climate data for a period of about 1.3 million years. Is the dream of every climate researcher, which it truly is. So when we talk about looking at ice cores, Ice cores are viable as markers for, maybe 100,000 years. They can go back tens of thousands of years, but they don't have the ability to go back much further than that. So then when we're looking at climate, we are looking at geological records in rocks or in marine fossils, and we're having to find a lot of substitutes. This, much like this sediment core, kind of works like tree rings. You can see layers of deposits seasonally as they've been placed down on the lake bottom year after year after year. So the sediments have shown an increase in winter precipitation during the warm seasons. The Mediterranean climate is characterized by strong seasonal contrast between dry summers, wet winters. They can see changes in winter rainfall over these millions of years. Basically, though, this is now going to give a really good, strong insight into climate over a much longer period of time than we previously had access to.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, to have that kind of a long-term local climate is always helpful to be able to say, okay, how much has it changed? Because we have measurements from glaciers, we have measurements from the other sediments, but to be able to really dig into these mud rings, they're not tree rings, but to dig into this soil and to say, how did the Mediterranean change and how will it potentially change in the future? Make better predictions, right?
How the Mediterranean, yes, or how you can take it away from the Mediterranean too, because once you have 1 million years of data, you can then say, okay, the Mediterranean climate was different for 400,000 years ago. What was it like then? Oh, it's actually more like a Canadian lake or something of this nature at this point in time, or actually the 400,000 years it would have been a warm season, but you can sort of contrast and sort of look at different places in the world and what those effects were on weather. So it's really fascinating. It is one of the furthest back models we now have that we can plunk into with the rest of the data that we have.
1.3 million years. I mean, I feel like it should be a Dr. Evil. Millions of dollars. Yeah, millions of years. That's awesome. Yeah, those scientists are so excited right now. They're like, we went back so far. Oh my gosh. Do you know what time it is right now?
What time is it?
Is it that time again?
It's time for Blair's Animal Corner.
With Blair.
She loves our creatures, great and small. Biped, millipede, no pet at all. You want to hear about animals? She's your girl. Except for giant pandas and squirrels. There's Animal Corner.
What you got, Blair?
Oh, I have an age-old story. You go down in your submarine. You use your
submarine.
Yes, your yellow submarine. You use your ROV, your remotely operated vehicle, to kind of scope out what's down there. You happen upon an amazing jellyfish, and you go, I know. I want to grab that jelly for future research. You reach out your grasping and manipulating tools.
Okay, not your hand, because grabbing jellyfish with your hands is a really bad idea because of their stinging nematocytes. But anyway, go on.
Right. So you grab with the metal claw hand on the ROV. It closes in around the jelly so it doesn't slip away, and
Smashes it.
it goes into a million pieces. And those slip away.
I don't like the end of that story.
So until now, that was the only method available for grabbing jellyfish underwater. These
What about
tools,
a net?
Yeah, so you could use a net. You could use a net, but not on an ROV as of yet. But on the ROVs, these were used. They were developed by marine oil and gas industries, so they're very heavy and bulky. They were actually developed to move rocks and heavy equipment, so it will often shred the jellies. The other issue with a net is that if the jelly decides to swim out of your net, that's that.
Yep.
So there's a lot of complications there. But from Harvard's Wyss Institute for Biologically Inspired Engineering, they have found an ultra soft underwater gripper. Jellyfish are about 95% water. The reason that they are looked at so much for research is not just because they are amazing environmental indicators, they respond to changes in their environment, but they also have an amazing potential to yield scientific discovery. For example, green fluorescent protein used in gene expression studies actually was originally discovered in jellyfish. Also, jellyfish and their amazing way to combat aging is a current source of a lot of studies to try to figure out how to combat aging in humans and other vertebrates. But there's all sorts of potential for jellyfish through research, but there has been this pretty big barrier of grabbing them. So this ultra soft underwater gripper, and Kiki, I'm hoping that you see there's if you look to the right of the story, there's a YouTube link there, so you can share what this thing looks like.
I was just kidding. I was just finding things.
Perfect. So it uses hydraulic pressure to gently but firmly wrap its, quote, fettuccine-like fingers around a single jellyfish. And
he's got noodle fingers. Very limp handshake.
Without causing harm. Yes.
Nice.
So they can potentially grab all sorts of things with this, but the way it works is it has these 6 quote-unquote fingers that look like fettuccine. They're composed of thin, flat strips of silicone. They have a hollow channel that has a bonded layer of flexible but stiffer polymer nanofibers. The fingers are attached to a rectangular 3D printed plastic palm, and then when their channels are filled with water, they curl in the direction of the nanofiber coated side. They exert an extremely low amount of pressure on these jellies, about 0.0455 kilopascals, or less than 1/10 of the pressure of a human's eyelid on their eye.
Wow.
So this is a very
so looking at this with these luminescent looking long tendrils as they enclose the jellyfish, it looks like a sea anemone.
It does. You're right.
It's taking what the nature has been doing already and applying it for our.
Well, anemones are basically upside down jellies. So there you go. So they have this extremely low pressure. They can capture a jellyfish, and the current things that they use to capture jellyfish. Remember, this new one is 0.0455 kilopascals. The current things I was describing at the beginning of the story, about 1 kilopascal. So that's a pretty big difference. It's like 20 times the pressure. So you can understand why that could shred them up. So they were able to fit this extra soft, gentle gripper to a handheld device and tested its ability, I love this, in the New England aquariums in Boston. So they were able to test this on moon jellies in the aquarium, on jelly blubbers and spotted jellies, all of them about the size of a golf ball or a little bit larger than that. And so they found that they were actually able to trap the jellyfish against the palm, and the jellyfish, despite this very low amount of pressure, were unable to break free until they released the gripper. They then, very important, showed no signs of stress or other adverse effects after being released. And they could use these fettuccine fingers around 100 times before showing any sign of wear and tear. Their next steps they hope for this study would be to continue to refine the ultra-soft gripper's design and find ways to conduct studies to evaluate the jellyfish's physiological response to being held. Because even though afterwards they didn't show any signs of stress or injury, they'd like to be able to make sure that grabbing the jellies with this is not going to have any sort of cascading effect on them or their ecosystem, so that they make sure that they're not hurting anybody.
It sounds like a little bit overly concerned about the mental health of jellies. Although, if you can think, although that's one of the few creatures I would think of on the planet that doesn't get embraced often.
Yeah.
It's
really like they're getting a hug.
It might stress them out a bit.
Jellies hug each other. I've never seen this.
Nope.
So I think even if you're not that worried about jellies, which maybe it's worth being worried about. What if it stresses them out and they broadcast spawn all of a sudden? Right? That could affect ecosystems and ecologies. So there are potential possibilities, right? They could throw
they get
their
stressed out, or they get stressed out and they don't spawn when they're supposed to.
Yeah.
How many of these are we grabbing? Are we grabbing every jelly in the population, or even a percentage?
I mean, but remember, they can release like millions of gametes. Anyway, the real thing here is you have to start with something like the jellyfish, so that you can extrapolate this research and this methodology to other things. Maybe this is how we should be grabbing blobfish underwater. Maybe this is how we should be grabbing other kind of soft-bodied things that are really, really deep. So this could potentially move forward into a whole new world of, quote, unprecedented gentleness in robots.
I'm all for gentle robots, and
they're going to be as smart as 8th graders and very gentle.
And
Let me hug you to death.
Let me hug you with my spaghetti fingers.
Fettuccine, please.
Fettuccine fingers.
It's flat.
Fettuccine.
There we go. And now from gentle robots to squirrels, just one nightmare to another. Squirrels are eavesdropping on other animals.
Oh, I knew that cartoon was right.
Rick and Morty.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, what are we going to do about the Argentina
true.
situation? Yeah, we're going to have to go down to what is that human? Is he listening to us?
So not quite that intense, but researchers looking at eastern gray squirrels in the wild were able to see, this is a sample size of 54 squirrels, they were able to see that they were responding to bird calls. And not just any bird calls, but it gets kind of more complicated. So they actually went into the wild, into quote unquote wild, into public parks and residential areas in Ohio. So the squirrels version of the wild. And they played a red-tailed hawk call. This is a common predator of both squirrels and small birds. Then they followed the predator's call with either a multi-species songbird call or ambient sounds lacking bird calls. And then they monitored the behavior of the squirrel for 3 minutes. So the idea is you hear a red-tailed hawk, predator. You hear songbirds, everything's okay. Yeah. Tweet. No tweet tweets if there's a red-tailed hawk nearby. If you play red-tailed hawk, go ahead. Ah! There we go. And then just ambient noise with no bird calls. Shh. Then that means birds have taken cover. So all squirrels showed an increase in predator vigilance behaviors, such as freezing, looking up, or fleeing after they heard the hawk's call. However, squirrels that were played bird chatter afterwards performed fewer vigilance behaviors and returned to normal levels of watchfulness more quickly than squirrels that didn't hear bird calls after the hawk's call. So that means that the squirrels not only are listening to predatory calls, but they are also listening to casual chatter of many bird species to indicate safety. The authors add, quote, "We knew that squirrels eavesdropped, on the alarm calls of some bird species, but we were excited to find out that they also eavesdrop on non-alarm sounds that can indicate the birds feel relatively safe. Perhaps in some circumstances, cues of safety could be as important as cues of danger. So I'll say first, this makes sense. Kind of well done moment. Something maybe we haven't really thought about, but ultimately, yeah. Wouldn't you, as a prey animal, pay attention to what the other prey animals are doing in the area?
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
Also, fun side note, the sound of red-tailed hawk
Yeah.
is the sound every American thinks the bald eagle makes.
Yes. Because bald eagles sound real dumb.
They sound like turkeys.
They sound like a choking turkey. Yeah.
Yeah. So that that screeching eagle coming down, that's actually a red-tailed hawk. They always use the red-tailed hawk as the voiceover for the bald eagle. Yeah.
It does sound more regal, gotta say. So squirrels, they're listening to all of us.
They're listening. I knew it. We knew it. Keep them safe.
Can't be trusted.
Animals. They're social animals to begin with. They're smart animals. We know they're paying attention in some, it just makes sense that there would be a continuous monitoring of multiple signals.
Well, and if I can just say, the inciting incident that started my issue with squirrels was based on the fact that I was dressed like a zookeeper, and so the squirrel thought that I had food. And that means they were paying attention to either the clothes or the sounds of the jingling keys or the sound of my walkie-talkie. There was some sort of clue that they were being given that went, that person drops food.
I'm going to come attack it.
Yeah. And then squirrels and I were never the same.
Oh, squirrels. Oh, but
is this the backstory?
Yes.
The backstory of the
I can do a dramatic storytelling at some other time. Maybe for the 20th anniversary.
Perfect.
Reenactment.
I could do the story of all the times animals have attacked me.
Oh my goodness. That's
Blair's
hilarious.
Animal Attack Corner.
Yeah. It comes with the territory.
With Blair. So, quick science news for the end of the show. We have got some new water collecting technology that is on the horizon. A researcher named Omar Yagi, he grew up in Jordan outside of Amman, and where water was very scarce. And now he's a chemist at the University of California, Berkeley, working on porous crystalline materials that are called metal organic frameworks, or MOFs. And these are materials that they've got lots of holes in them. And so the surface area is incredibly huge, and it's like a chemical sponge. And so these materials can absorb lots and lots and lots of stuff. And so historically, they've been very expensive because of the materials that have been used. But now the materials that they have upgraded it with is aluminum, which is about $3 per kilogram. And so it's a lot cheaper. And the material can be set outside and on its own produces about 1.5 liters of water overnight. What they do is they run a charge through it, and it kind of opens and closes the material so that it absorbs and then releases the material. So it absorbs the water from the air and releases it into, like a jar or something like that, a collecting station. And the material, they think they can get it to the point that it will be able to absorb 8 to 9 kilograms of water from the air. And they don't think it's going to take them very long to get to that point. And they think that they are going to be able to create setups that they'll be able to take to villages in very remote water scarce regions to be able to produce up to 22,000 liters a day.
Wow.
Okay, I have
a Star Wars Tatooine hydration farmers.
I have a potentially dumb question.
Yes.
Won't this impact the water cycle?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, if you're pulling 22,000 liters of water out of the air, it will potentially change the local atmospheric conditions. And so that's going to be very interesting. But in a dry region, I actually don't know what would happen in the area if it would be enough water out of the air to maybe induce more water flow, whether there's some kind of would be like pressure vacancies as a result.
Right.
I'm wondering,
is that going to then change
if it would just make it drier?
Is it going to move things and change the way air and water flows around the planet if you're pulling too much out?
I think it's a very
humans
interesting
have
question.
an impact.
I know, but I'm just saying in a world where we're concerned about climate change, and one of the things climate change does is impacts water currents and air currents. Sure. This seems like an interesting choice.
It also seems like something that many communities might really badly need in the near future.
Really badly. I mean, we already have cities in cities in South Africa, for instance, that have basically, they're like, we have no water. We're out of water last year. They were go on full drought with no reserves. And this is going to happen more and more in cities around the world. And so we need technologies like this. We need desalination. We need, so to be able to harvest water from the desert air is this is potentially very big. But I would love to know what the impacts of removing water from these areas, what it could potentially do. I don't know if anybody knows that. Well, I'd love to know. If somebody knows, let us know.
In the desert, sorry, one last thing. The plants live in the desert, and they depend on the very, very, very small amount of precipitation that occurs in the desert and the dew that's in the morning in the desert. And if you're reducing the amount of that exists, that could have really big impacts on the ecosystems and any farming that's going on in the area too. So just a thought. There's other things that might be impacted that also affect human life. So.
It's always good to have thoughts. We like the thoughts. And my final story for the night, a Japanese woman is the first person in the world to receive a corneal transplant of induced pluripotent stem cells. The cornea is an area of the eye that when it's damaged, you can't replace it. Or it doesn't fix very easily. And oftentimes you end up having to have a corneal transplant. Corneal transplants to date have used the corneas of cadavers, so people who are recently deceased. But those are in limited numbers. And so it would be much better to be able to have stem cells that could be taken and turned into corneal cell layers. And so that's what happened. They had a donor provide cells. The cells were turned into these induced pluripotent stem cells and then turned into corneal cells. And they grew in a layer in a dish. And they took that layer of cells, put it into her eye, and her eye seems to be recovering just fine.
Oh, good. I wasn't sure that they was going to have a happy ending. It's like
has a happy ending. This is the first one. They have two more.
The first one they did.
Stem cell eye drops. Sign me up.
They have two more surgeries scheduled. So they have 3 surgeries for this trial, this particular pilot. But the first one seems to be going well so far. And like other corneal transplants that involve cadaver donors, because these are donor stem cells, there is a immunosuppression that has to go on. So even though her cornea may last the rest of her life, she may also be on immunosuppressive drugs for the rest of her life. Fun. Am I afraid of Justin's next story? But he's not here.
Ooh,
Am I?
You definitely shouldn't be. Actually,
I'm not afraid of your story.
No, it's a fear removal story. Actually, it's a hair removal story.
Okay.
So Center for Disease Control, let's start out with the reason for this. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention estimates that 2.86 million new chlamydia infections and 820,000 new gonorrhea infections occur in the United States every year. how does everybody not have chlamydia all 24/7 at that point? Like, that's every year.
Well, it could be the same people over and over, right? Like you get treated, and then
these are curable. The agency prevention recommendations for sexually active people include staying in a long-term mutually monogamous relationship with a partner, obviously who's STD free, and using condoms consistently and properly, safe sex, that sort of thing. Both chlamydia and gonorrhea are caused by bacteria. They infect both men and women, and they can have reproductive tract infections that have lasting damage in women, and especially if left untreated. Okay, so it's a big problem. There has been information that if you are a person who maintains a no-hair zone in the nether region, that you are more likely to acquire an STD.
And that would be because of cuts and from hair removal, so that you would have potential cuts and abrasions that would
entry points. Yes,
that'd be entry points for infection. Yeah.
So, but those aren't necessary. You don't necessarily need an entry point. So, according to a new study, maintaining the no hair zone and the nether region of at least a lady anatomy does not put the women at greater risk for acquiring an STD. Shaving, waxing, considered in this study, they have two different ways of evaluating that they used. Shaving, waxing, they consider these as extreme grooming, extreme grooming.
Extreme grooving, also
fun. No, extreme grooming, which in California is pretty much considered the baseline. And there's other stuff that happens beyond that. Turns out this does not put you at greater risk for chlamydia or gonorrhea. While this may sound obvious, there has been a lot of misinformation, and it's not just urban legend type stuff. There's a website I looked at just to Google around and see where this was coming from, where else this was getting echoed. This is from a website called the International Society for Sexual Medicine. They say infections such as strep and staph infections and sexually transmitted infections like genital herpes are also possible because they can be transmitted from a partner's skin, as a warning against the possible downsides of maintaining a no hair zone. So there has actually been previous research that spawned then many media reports warning women about a connection between hair removal and STDs. Researchers at the Ohio State University wondered how strong that connection actually was. And what they ended up finding is that it doesn't exist at all. So they looked back at the previous studies and found that sexual frequency wasn't something that was correlated to or wasn't included in the data. So the idea is there is a potentiality that somebody who has frequent sex, who is maybe having multiple partners, might also be a what they called an extreme groomer.
Right. So there's the confounding variable there. Yeah.
Hugely confounding variable. They went, it's not the biggest study size, but they had 214 college students, all of whom were women, and examined possible link between the extreme grooming and over the last year, or at least 6 months, 6 times in the past months, as testing positive and tested to see if they would be positive for chlamydia and gonorrhea. They found no connection, basically. Studies in the journal PLOS One. One of the interesting things, too, is they had, there was almost 98% of the participants said they had done some grooming. And then between 18 or 54%, depending on the measure that they used, were considered extreme groomers, which is the removal of all of the hair.
So, but this study was just on chlamydia and gonorrhea. Mm-hmm. So the other thing that you mentioned was also including genital herpes, which I would think that might still be something, because that is a skin-to-skin contact communicable thing.
So that was the one that was specifically mentioned on that
on the website.
Yeah, but So there's apparently this is also echoed a number of other places that there is a connection between this grooming behavior and one of the things is, I mean, literally, if you take the reverse of that, you would almost assume that pubic hair helps provide protection,
right? Which is a dangerous thing to think about. Yeah.
First of all, false. And second of all, yes, completely dangerous misnomer to go into. And then it's also a, you're making people question whether their personal choice in grooming behaviors is putting them at that health risk, which it's not. So you're creating stress and you're creating a misnomer of a potential protection. Like, really just practice safe sex.
That's pretty much what it comes down to.
It's still, and by the way, also, I always have to throw this out. There is no such thing as safe sex.
Yeah. Okay.
You can mitigate
mitigated
risk, but there is nothing. There is no form of safe sex.
Well, I guess the only form of safe sex would be to show each other copies of blood tests before.
Hey, I have done this I have done this. I've done this multiple times. I feel better. They feel, and then it's like, who cares? But there is definitely no the selection process is part of it, and being able, if you can't have that sort of open communication where you can ask somebody to see a test, then you should, they may not be the right person. Yeah.
Blair, tell me about a super fast snail.
Oh my goodness, I'm going to do it super fast. Occidental College, Los Angeles has identified cone snails, how they hydraulically propel their feeding structure. So cone snails, they are the snail that is famous for being actually potentially fatal to humans because their radula, instead of this tongue scrapey thing like most snails have. Instead, there's this chitinous. It's hard, it's pointy, and they use it to catch fast-moving fish and other marine animals by stabbing them and inserting venom. And this venom is very, very dangerous. They have measured the speed of this hydraulic radula and found that it is the quickest movement among mollusks, which I don't know how much that's really saying. But anyway, they found that the hydraulically propelled radula is capable of producing movements at remarkably high speeds. They were able to evaluate the anatomy and functional limits of the structures to try to see how that could be turned into new forms of robots or medical devices. Think about syringes, stuff like that. Though this is why I brought this story. It's weird because these scientists believe that the high speeds of the movement is necessary to deliver the venom into the potential prey before they escape, which one of the things they eat is fast-swimming fish. But when they used high-speed videography, they found that the radula harpoon from the cone snail can be propelled into prey within 100 milliseconds with a peak acceleration of 280,000 meters per second squared.
Wow, that sounds fast.
It's fast, and a maximum acceleration of over 400,000 meters per second squared. They are similar to a bullet. They're so fast, but their prey are 2 orders of magnitude slower. So even those quote unquote fast fish are way slower.
So why are they so fast? Why do they overkill?
We don't know. So they know how now, and they think that they might be able to turn this into technology on a robot or in medical devices. But they still don't know why. Why are they so fast?
Two things. Once upon a time, there were a lot faster fish, but they got them all. Or two, there's still a dodge factor. The other fish is slower speed wise, but maybe is for targeting reasons. You acquire the target and then need to hit it, because if you are getting there slower, even though the water current might push you off target a little bit. So it might just be for accuracy, not necessarily to overcome the speed of the
that's interesting. Well, jury's still out on this fast snail.
We're going to be done too right now. We out. And we out, and we out, and we out. We've come to the end of another episode of This Week in Science. We've done it. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. I would love to say thank you to everyone who helps make this show possible. Thank you to Gordon Cloud for helping in the chat room. Thank you to Identity 4 for recording the show. Thank you to Fada for helping with social media and with our show descriptions and helping with that YouTube chat room. Oh my goodness, so many thanks. Thanks to you all for watching. And thank you to our Patreon sponsors. Thank you to Paul Disney, Andrew Swanson, Craig Landon, Andy Groh, Ed, Stu Pollock, Philip Shane, Ken Hayes, Harrison Prather, Charlene Henry, Joshua Fury, Steve DeBell, Alex Wilson, Tony Steele, Richard Porter, Mark Massaros, Jack, Matthew Litwin, Jason Roberts, Bill K, Bob Calder, Time Jumper 319, Eric Knapp, Richard, Brian Condren, Dave Neighbor, Donald Mundis, Sarah Forfar, Dan K, Matt Bass, Darwin Hannon, Patrick Pecoraro, Ben Bignell, Gene Tellier, John Gridley, David Williams, Corinne Benton, Adam LaJoy, Sarah Chavis, Rodney, Tiffany Boyd, John Bertram, Mountain Sloth, Seth O'Gradney, Stephen Alberon, John Ratnaswamy, Dave Friedel, Daryl Myshak, Paul Ronovich, Sue Doster, Dave Wilkinson, Noodles, Kevin Reardon, Christoph Zukenreck, Ashish Pants, Ulysses Adkins, Artyom, Rick Ramus, Paul, John McKee, Jason Olds, Brian Carrington, Christopher Dreyer, Lisa Suzuki, Jim Drapeau, Greg Riley, Sean Lamb, Steve Leisman, Kurt Larson, Rudy Garcia, Marjorie, Gary S., Robert, Greg Briggs, Brendan Minish, Christopher Rappin, Flying Out, Aaron Lucen, Matt Sutter, Mark Hessenflow, Kevin Parachan, Byron Lee, and E.O. Thank you all for your support. And I recognized some new, I didn't recognize, but I read some new names in there. Thank you for becoming new patrons on Patreon. If anyone else out there would like to help us on Patreon, you can find information by clicking the Patreon link at TWIS.org. You can also help us out simply by telling your friends to subscribe to TWIS. On next week's show, we're back again on TWIS.org/live at 8 p.m. Pacific time. We're also on YouTube. And you can watch and join the chat rooms. But if you can't make it, don't worry, because we're a podcast.
Thanks for listening. For more information on anything you've heard here today, show notes will be available on our website. That's at www.twis.org. You can also find out information about our guests there. And while you're there, you can also make comments and start conversations with the hosts and other listeners.
Or you can contact us directly. Email Kirsten at thisweekinscience.com, Justin at twistminion@gmail.com, or Blair at blairbaz@twist.org. Just be sure to put twist, TWIS, somewhere in your subject line. Otherwise, Blair, what will happen?
Your email will be spam filtered into oblivion.
You can also hit us up on the Twitter, where we are at Twist Science, at Dr. Kiki, at JacksonFly, and at Blair's Menagerie. We love your feedback. If there's a topic you would like us to cover or address, a suggestion for an interview, a haiku that comes to you tonight, please let us know.
We'll be back here next week, and we hope you'll join us again for more great science news.
And if you've learned anything from the show, remember,
it's all in your head.
This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science, it's the end of the world. So I'm setting up shop, got my banner unfurled. It says the scientist is in, I'm gonna sell my advice. Show them how to stop the robots with a simple device. I'll reverse global warming with a wave of my hand. And all it'll cost you is a couple of grand. 'Cause this week's science is coming your way. So everybody listen to what I say. I use the scientific method for all that it's worth. And I'll broadcast my opinion all over the earth. 'Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This week in science. This week in science. This week in science. 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 I've got one disclaimer, and it shouldn't be news, that what I say may not represent your views, but I've done the calculations and I've got a plan. If you listen to the science, you may just yet understand that we're not trying to threaten your philosophy. We're just trying to save the world from jeopardy. 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 And this week in science is coming your way. So everybody listen to everything we say. And if you use our method instead of rolling a die, we may rid the world of toxoplasma gondii. Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 Got a laundry list of items I want to address, from stopping global hunger to dredging Loch Ness. I'm trying to promote more rational thought, and I'll try to answer any question you've got. But how can I ever see the changes I seek when I can only set up shop 1 hour a week? This Week in Science is coming your way. You better just listen to what we say, and if you've learned anything from the words that we've said, then please just remember it's all in your head. Cause it's This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in Science. This Week in Science. This Week in Science. 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 This Week in 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 Science.